The Bengals host the Texans on Sunday at Paycor Stadium. CJ Stroud, well, he's the favorite for Offensive Rookie of the Year. We discuss him, plus the Bengals hot streak, and much, much more on a crossover edition of Locked On Bengals.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily Houston Texans podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi again, everyone, and welcome in to a special crossover edition on the Locked On Podcast Network, previewing a matchup that should be a good one. Bengals and Texans on Sunday, 1 p.m. Eastern. I'm James Erpine, along with Cody Davis. James, I'm Locked On Bengals host. Cody is the Locked On Texans host. And thank you so much for making us your first listen. Today's crossover is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code all lowercase Locked On NFL for a first deposit match up to $100. And Cody, obviously this is a big matchup. I think it's bigger than a lot of people realized it would be coming into the season with both of these teams 500 or better. What's the biggest storyline with the Texans right now? I think I know the answer, but what's the biggest storyline around them following their big win over Tampa?
Well, of course, obviously, the biggest storyline that everybody knows is the performance that not only CJ Stroud, but the Houston Texans put on Sunday when they came back against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to win 39-37. And, you know, that performance Stroud gave, especially in the second half, is part of the reason why we're sitting here today talking about a very interesting matchup between the Texans and the Bengals. Because, look, I'm not going to lie to you, James. I thought without a shadow of a doubt that this was going to be a loss, a blowout loss. I thought that the Texans were going to be outmatched at the start of the season. However, when you take a look at how well CJ Stroud has played throughout the first 7 games of his career, when you take a look at the fact that the offense has picked things up, the guys on the defensive side of the ball, they've been doing their thing. You take a look at the coaches, they are ahead of schedule in terms of their progression and development that we thought we was going to get at this stage in the season. However, the biggest storyline that's kind of put to the side, but I think is going to be even bigger in terms of how will this impact the game, is the injuries that the Houston Texans are dealing with. I'm pretty sure from afar you've been seeing it throughout the whole entire season, basically ever since Scott Quisenberry went down with that MCL ACL tear that he sustained during the second week of training camp. The Houston Texans, they've been hit by a gauntlet of injuries, and things actually got worse in that win against Tampa Bay when you had guys like Jimmy Ward, MJ Stewart, Hassan Ridgeway, even John Mechie, a guy who, you know, we wanted to see more of, but he went down with a real injury. So at the time of this recording, we haven't got the official injury report to see who's going to be out, who's going to be questionable, who's going to be probable for the game. But the injuries, especially to Jimmy Ward going up against a quarterback like Joe Burrow, you definitely got to make sure that your secondary is set. And to not have him on the field, potentially not have him on the field, is going to hinder this team.
Yeah, I think injuries, they're always tough when we do these crossovers because we don't know. As of recording, the Jamar Chase back issue certainly lingers. I know he was sore on Monday. I think if I had to guess right now, I would guess that he's going to play. I don't know for sure. By the time this comes out, that could totally change. So that's just part of it with podcasting and doing these crossovers. But the biggest story for the Bengals certainly coming into this game is very simple. They've officially dug themselves out of that 1-3 hole that they started in. And they're 5-3 with 4 straight. Can they keep it rolling? Can you beat this young upstart Texans team that I think surprised a lot of people last week? And CJ Stroud, obviously doing what he did. This for some, a game sandwiched in between the Bills, and 4 days later you have to play the Ravens after this Texans game on Sunday. They play on Thursday Night Football in Week 11. I think people here, before CJ Stroud's performance, before the win over the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, said, that might be a trap game. There's no trap game when you're facing a 4-4 Texans team that just nearly scored 40 points, and CJ Stroud nearly threw 500 yards and set the rookie record. I think that part is nice for the Bengals because it's like, oh, you have our attention. Not that they wouldn't, but there's no sleepwalking here in this game. And I think that's the storyline. Can the Bengals keep it going, especially with a Ravens team looming that leads the division, holds the tiebreaker over the Bengals, and it's a short week. You don't want to get caught looking ahead. I don't think they will, but certainly this is a game at home that you want to get and bolster their playoff chances. At the same time, the Texans, they are playing well. I think they're well coached. That's the element of this that I want to get into at some point during this crossover, at least from afar. That's my thought, Cody. But the home road splits, the reason you thought they were going to lose to Tampa last week is because they had just lost to Carolina. And that was an ugly game. I think they scored 13 points. It's not like that was an offensive heavy game. What's been the difference with this Houston team, when they're at home versus on the road?
Well, in terms of the difference between what took place against Carolina and Tampa Bay, it was basically the play calling. Bobby Sloyd opened the playbook. Down here in the city of Houston, we actually had a joke that with Kaimi Fairbairn going out with the quad injury, you no longer had a kicker, which means that you couldn't stay conservative. And not only that, you came into this game without your number one running back, Dameon Pierce. And look, unfortunately, Dameon Pierce has not had a good sophomore campaign up until this point. So it was like, even though you want to establish the run, I think they had like 7 or 8 rushing yards at the half. So clearly that wasn't working. It wasn't like, okay, CJ, just get us, in field goal range. And, when we get the opportunity to do so, we'll just, score 3 points, 3 points, and 3 points just to kind of stay in range. However, because both of those guys was out, it was like, okay, it kind of forced Bobby Sloyd's hands to literally open up the playbook more and trust his rookie quarterback, who isn't playing like a rookie as of right now. And that's part of the reason why we saw a big difference between how they played against Carolina and how they played against Tampa Bay. Now, to answer your questions about the home and road split, I think that is probably the one notion that you can point to in terms of the Texans being a young team. Because, James, you've been around a very long time covering teams. When you have a young team, they do a lot better at home when they have an opportunity to sleep in their own bed. They in their own familiar territory. They don't have to do any traveling. They got friends and family in the stands. It's just that comfortable environment that a lot of the young guys actually feel, and it's not just the roads and home split. That's just young guys in general. I know a lot of people, including myself, have been really impressed by the production that we are seeing out of Tank Dell. Because I'm not going to lie to you. I saw Tank Dell a little bit when he was playing with the University of Houston Cougars. And when the Texans drafted him in the 3rd, I was like, I think that's kind of high, but, we'll see. I did not see Tank Dell being this important, playing this good, and this explosive for the Houston Texans this early. And a couple weeks ago, I believe it was after the victory against the Jacksonville Jaguars, I had an opportunity to do a quick one-on-one with him. And I asked him, what's been one of the keys to your production this soon? And he told me, just being comfortable in the city of Houston, because it's a place that he already played in over the last 2 seasons. He already know where to go, where not to go. He has his family and friends here and all this other good stuff. It's just that comfortable feel here that he considered his second home. It makes a lot of sense. And when you take a look at the Houston Texans as a whole, especially with a lot of the young guys that they're throwing out there, it definitely makes a lot of sense as to why we see the Texans team be more successful inside NRG Stadium versus away. Now, look, I'm not going to lie to you. Given how bad home field advantage has been for this team over the last couple of years, look, I would definitely want them to do better on the road, but I'll be okay. I'm okay with the success that they have been having so far inside NRG Stadium.
For sure. And there's no reason to sleep on them. Like I said, there's a bunch of key matchups. Tank Dell is involved in those matchups. So let's get to that and dive into these matchups that will likely determine Sunday's outcome. We will do that coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by DoorDash. DoorDash is the place to go, whether it's game day, whether it's Monday, whether it's Wednesday, Thursday when you're listening or watching us right now. Why? Because you can get your favorite food and it's delivered right to your door. You can kick your feet up, order it from the comfort of your own home in the DoorDash app, and boom, it gets delivered. Now, I don't know about our Houston listeners. I know in Cincinnati, the weather's starting to change. It's a nice day today. It's going to get cooler. You don't want to go out. It's getting darker early because of the time change. DoorDash is perfect for you in some local spots. Shout out to Skyline. I've DoorDash Skyline multiple times during this football season. City Bird, I mention them all the time, at least once a week with DoorDash. And all you have to do is go into the App Store, download the DoorDash app, and you're going to get 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter code LOCK23. Subject to change, terms apply, and of course, pizza, wings, anything you could think of, it's on there. And you can get 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter code LOCK23. Don't forget to use code LOCK23 for 50% off up to a $10 value on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and spend $15 or more. Subject to change, terms apply. All right, Cody, let's get to some of these huge matchups that are going to determine the game. And I think the first one for me starts with what we saw last week from this Houston offense. Explosive plays. Tank Dell, obviously. Nico Collins, the 85. Brown making big plays as well. Had 100-plus yards receiving. CJ Stroud, there's a reason those numbers look so great. They were just crushing it. Explosive plays downfield. This Bengals defense, especially earlier in the season, they've gotten better at this, but it hasn't been perfect. They've given up explosive plays, and they've had some issues there. And so I think that's a big factor, especially early on. You don't want the rookie quarterback getting into a rhythm and picking up where he left off and finding one of these guys deep downfield for a big play. The explosive plays. Who wins that battle? I think that's a huge, huge matchup going into Sunday.
Yeah, and that's where I'm looking at this from a standpoint, can the Houston Texans, sustain what they did in the second half against Tampa Bay? But, when you go back and you take a look at how well CJ Stroud played, how well this offense was able to move the ball, you have to give credit to the offensive line. An offensive line who did allow a couple pressures, an offensive line who did allow a couple sacks in Sunday's win. Now you go into Sunday's game against the Cincinnati Bengals. You're looking at opportunity where you got to go against, in my opinion, one of the league's best defensive linemen, and Trey Hendrickson. And this is a guy who has already recorded about 8 to 9 sacks on the season. And look, the Houston Texans offensive line has been a roller coaster. There's been moments where they kept the pocket clean for CJ, and that's part of the reason why he has had opportunities to go out there and make a lot of these explosive plays, not just Tampa Bay, but against Jacksonville, but against the New Orleans Saints, especially in that first half, against the Pittsburgh Steelers. However, there's been moments where the offensive line have struggled. It made it a very long day for CJ Stroud, which means they could not go out there and get those explosive plays. And I'm looking at this from a standpoint where the offensive line, they got to make sure that they find some type of stability to get back to how they was. They played a very, in my opinion, okay game Sunday. A lot of the struggles that we did see did come in the first half. However, when you have Trey on the other side of the line of scrimmage, and look, they have done a pretty solid job in terms of protecting the opposing team's best pass rusher. They did a very good job on Watt. They did a very good job on Cam Jordan a couple weeks ago. And that's like, you have to make sure that you replicate that success in order to give CJ Stroud and this offense an opportunity to go inside Cincinnati and actually take care of business like we all hoping they can do.
Yeah, I think that's such a key, right? Is slowing down Trey and being able to keep him upright. Because if he's able to extend plays and keep his eyes downfield, well, someone's going to get open at some point. And so I think that's a huge, huge factor. On the flip side, this Bengals offense, what they've done over the past 4 games, they've scored on their first 2 possessions in each of the past 4 games, touchdowns in each of their past 3 games in back-to-back possessions. So they're playing with a lead. They're getting out to a good start. They're giving their defense the ability to kind of tee off a bit and get after opposing quarterbacks. Joe Burrow has just been on fire. They've been able to keep him upright and protect him. That includes on the road against the 49ers. He went back-to-back games against Seattle and San Francisco, completing 17 of 19 to start the game in each of those games. And then against the Bills on their first 2 drives, he was 11 of 14 in a touchdown, and they scored 2 touchdowns, like I said. So a fast start has been such a key for this Bengals offense, and they've gotten into a rhythm early on. How do you think Houston's defense matches up with Joe Burrow and company?
Whew, that's what scares me. If this defense was healthy, I would say they will match up very well. If they had an opportunity to go inside Cincinnati with Darius Stingley Jr. as your number 2 cornerback, and look,
Sure. Yeah.
I know there's questions surrounding Jamar Chase's availability for this game, but I'm pretty sure that he's going to try to give it a go, which means that the Texans secondary is going to be in a situation where they're going to have to slow down one of the best wide receiver duos in the league, and that's Chase alongside T. Higgins. And I look at this from a standpoint, you have to find a way to contain both of those guys. And look, Shaq Griffin has done a pretty solid job filling in for Darius Stingley Jr. in his injury. There's been moments, in my opinion, where I could say, you know what, I think he might have looked better only because he was the veteran and has more experience. However, there's been moments where I'm looking at Shaq Griffin, I'm thinking to myself, all right, Darius Stingley, come on, man. You got to come back, man. We got to get you back out there on the field. And as of right now, it doesn't seem like he's going to be back anytime soon. And there's only so much that Steven Nelson, who has put together, if I'm being honest, somewhat Pro Bowl caliber season up until this point. But there's only so much he can do. But when I take a look at the Texans secondary as a whole, slowing down the Bengals offense, especially with those 2 wide receivers, along with a top 5, top 3 quarterback in Joe Burrow, the defensive backfield is what worries me, because like I mentioned in the first segment, Jimmy Ward, he went down with a hamstring injury against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'm not expecting him to suit up for this game because we all know hamstring injuries could be tricky. Not only that, you also got to take a look at how much their depth has been hampered, because you lost MJ Stewart, I believe, the play or the following play later. And then in the win against the Pittsburgh Steelers, Eric Murray, who was playing fairly well as a backup to help with the depth purposes, he went down with a knee injury. So that's 3 safeties right there that you probably will not have Sunday against Cincinnati. And I think that is where this matchup on the defensive side of the ball gets really, really scary for me, at least.
Yeah, I look at the defense, and I see, especially the defensive line, I see names I know. Obviously, Will Anderson, they traded up and got him. Sheldon Rankins, Jerry Hughes. How has this front been? Have they been able to get after the quarterback? They're giving up just over 20 points per game. It's not like this defense is just getting crushed every single week. Is it because of this defensive line? Are they disrupting things a bit, or have they been struggled a little bit this year?
Oh, the defensive line been good, especially Will Anderson Jr. However, it goes back to injuries, because Will Anderson Jr., he was nicked up a little bit in the game against Tampa Bay, and Sheldon Rankins, who has been very well for the Houston Texans throughout this season, he has missed the previous 2 games with a knee injury. So it's like, okay, what are we doing here? But this defensive front, man, that defensive line has looked really good. And I know if a lot of people look at the numbers, they may not think that Will Anderson Jr. is having a phenomenal season, but the impact that he has had on that defensive line unit says a lot, especially due to the attention that he is getting. I believe it was going into last week's game, I had found a stat where he was top 5 in double teams. Due to the attention that he is getting, that has opened up the door for guys like a Jonathan Gannard, who is currently leading this team, I believe, with like 7.5 to 8 sacks as of right now this season. That's part of the reason why you've seen guys like Malik Collins get in and have an opportunity to disrupt the quarterback. And even though the stat numbers aren't there, I think as of right now, the Texans might have somewhere in the ballpark of like 17 sacks, which is like somewhere in the bottom of the league. They have done a really good job creating pressures on the quarterback. And there has been moments where, whether it was Lamar Jackson, whether it was Kenny Pickett, and I know Kenny Pickett got his own issues going on, but Derek Carr, Trevor Lawrence in the game where they beat the Jacksonville Jaguars, there have been moments where they have created so much pressure and disruption on the quarterbacks where it made it hard for them to get into a rhythm. And James, if a quarterback can't get into a rhythm, it's going to be a long day for your offense. And that's basically what we have been seeing throughout the first 7 games of the season. Except for the game against the Atlanta Falcons. I don't know what was going on, and Desmond Ridder ended up having a career day. That was just a bad day at that point.
A bad day at that point. We'll see what the Bengals have to do. Their path to making the Texans have a bad Sunday, and vice versa. What do the Texans have to do to win on Sunday? We will get to that coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by Jace Case. We spend a lot of time together, and we get fired up with wins, losses, who starts, who sits, because, well, we're talking football always here on the Locked On Podcast Network. And, well, it's time to have a personal chat. We just learned that you can get a 1-year supply on ED medications. You realize what that means? You can bring on extended travel, bring the natural disaster chain supply issue. You are covered, and you are covered with Jace Medical. Go online right now at jacemedical.com to receive your 12-month supply on your daily medication. Remember to use promo code LOCKEDON at checkout for a discount as well. A verified customer had this to say about Jace, quote, "I'm thankful for this service. Supply chain issues caused me to cut pills in half to have it. And instead of having to cut pills in half, I ordered most of my daily meds with a year supply. I also ordered an antibiotic kit. I feel secure now. Prices are lower than local pharmacies. I highly recommend this for everyone. If you or someone you love would like to get some peace of mind by having a year supply of any daily medicine, go to jacemedical.com and see if it's offered for you. Remember to use the promo code Locked On for $20 off your purchase." All right. The path to victory for the Houston Texans. They're 4-4. They're this fun, young, upstart team that has certainly surprised some through the first 8 weeks of the season. Cody, what do they have to do to upset the Bengals on Sunday?
There's 2 things they have to do. One, they got to find a way to continue to cause disruption on opposing team's quarterback. And James, before moving on, I do want to ask you, how has Joe Burrow looked? You know, with you guys winning, I believe it was 5 of the last 6 games, somewhere along those lines.
Mm-hmm. Oh, he's looked much better, and that calf has certainly hampered him early on, but over the past 2 weeks specifically, moving in the pocket, able to push the ball down the field, his accuracy is back. I mentioned how quick he's been able to start games and get into a rhythm early on.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a completely different player. Looks much, much different. So I think that's the key. Can you make sure that he keeps the ball rolling? That's certainly one of my path to victory.
Yeah.
If Joe Burrow's playing the way Joe Burrow's played. No, it's fine, because that's a big part of it, is having Joe Burrow play at that elite level. Against San Francisco, he's 28 of 32 for 283. Last week, similar numbers, and threw for 300 plus yards for the first time this year. So it's one of those things where if you have a quarterback playing at that level, like you saw last week, when your quarterback plays at a really, really high level and puts up big numbers, your team is tough to beat.
And I'm glad that you told me that, because I had an opportunity to finally watch him in a game against the Bills, and I'm looking at Joe. I said, okay, this is the Joe that I like. This is the Joe that is an MVP caliber player that has done some really good things so far in his short career. But I also looked at it from a standpoint that the Texans defense need to make sure on all 3 levels that they do everything they can. The defensive front, you got to make sure that you continue to make these quarterbacks uncomfortable, and for the second and third levels, you got to make sure that you keep your eyes on the swivel. You live up to Coach D'Amico Ryan's swarm mentality defense and make plays on the ball, especially that secondary. And I know I've talked a lot about the secondary injuries, but that is the most concerning thing for me, because I'm like, okay, even if they start the game out good, will the guys that you relying upon to back up and fill the vacancy for a lot of your top players, most definitely a Jimmy Ward. We have seen this defensive backfield with and without a Jimmy Ward, and trust me, it is not that good without a Jimmy Ward. And then the guys that made it at least sustainable, both of those guys, and MJ Stewart and Eric Murray, both of those guys are going to be out for this game most likely. But that is the number one key to victory. Contain Joe Burrow and make sure that you do not have a game where Jamar Chase and or T. Higgins go off, because like I mentioned, 2 of the best dynamic wide receiver duos in this league. And of course, on the offensive side of the ball, I always say this: consistency. I think that's the one thing that, whether it's CJ whether it's, his weapons in terms of this wide receiving core, the offensive line, or offensive coordinator Bobby Sloyd. You have to find a way to stay consistent, because there's been moments where they go out there and showcase that they can put up 25, 30, almost 40 points. And then there's been moments where, i.e. the game against the Carolina Panthers and the Atlanta Falcons, where you don't even get to 20 because you want to be conservative and try to establish the run. So just stay consistent at what works on the offensive side of the ball.
For the Bengals, obviously I already mentioned Joe Burrow and getting him going and keeping that passing offense at a high level. You mentioned it as well. I think that goes a long way. But the other part of this, and we've talked a lot about their fast starts on offense.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important for this defense to get off to a fast start against CJ Stroud and Tank Dell and Nico Collins, and to just let this offense know that they're not going to pick up where they left off against Tampa Bay, where they were just firing on all cylinders and really, really hot. I think that's important for the Bengals, because if a young team gets some confidence early in the game on the road, and that fire's going, it's tough to put it out sometimes, even though this defense has been really good and has rebounded after giving up opening touchdowns to the Bills and the Seahawks, just naming a few recent games for the Bengals that they ended up winning, and the defense rebounded. But you don't want to have to rebound this week. I think you want to get off to a quick start on defense, take control that way, and not let CJ Stroud get into a rhythm. Certainly not let their ground attack get going at all. You mentioned the struggles on the ground. If you can do that, I like their chances at home. And I'm going to pick the Bengals. I don't know prediction-wise exactly what I'll do score-wise. I can do that on Thursday's episode of Locked On Bengals, but I'll pick the Bengals in this one. I do think that it could be a more competitive game than most thought when the schedule came out. And they were playing the schedule game. I'm excited to watch it for sure. And so the storylines, it's a bigger game. I could see the Texans winning. I'm not going to dismiss that, but I know I'll take the Bengals in this one.
I could see the Texans winning too, but once again, my concerns for these injuries at key positions, I think at some point it might hamper their ability to win against one of the best teams in the AFC, one of the best teams in the league, if you're being honest. And, I'm looking at Cincinnati from afar every single week. It seems like you guys are, gaining that momentum, that steam of getting back to the level that you guys were last year. And I look at the Texans, I'm like, I think this game can definitely be a measuring stick in terms of to see how realistic the quote unquote playoff run we're all hoping that we get here in the city of Houston. But I just think maybe more so in the second half, the absences to a lot of these guys might turn in favor of Cincinnati. And James, as you mentioned, and for what I saw against the Bills, Joe Burrow is starting to get it going. Not saying CJ can't match him toe for toe, but I just think that this one might go in favor of Cincinnati.
Yeah, I think that's the fun part, is they have a good relationship. I know Burrow gave CJ some advice earlier in the year, or at least coming into the season.
Mm-hmm.
And so CJ's going to be excited for this one, going toe-to-toe with Burrow. A few years ago, Burrow was in the same position going up against different guys in the league. So that part will certainly be fun. I'm excited about this matchup. For more on this matchup, make sure you check out the Locked On Texans podcast, the Locked On Bengals podcast. We will have you set and get you ready for it. And of course, have post-game reaction as well on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. So for Cody Davis of Locked On Texans, I'm James Rapine. Thank you so much for listening to a Locked On Network crossover.